Still brought my own cup up. Good morning, everyone. Oh, that's a nice loud welcome, thank you. So, thank you, Michelle, for reading all that. I really did not expect the whole of, I nearly said Goliath chapter 7 there, Goliath 17, of 1 Samuel 17. It's a huge, 58 verses. Last Thursday in house group, we went through the passage verse by verse. I don't think we should do that this week. No. Okay, so when before we started, I started to look at this. The first thing that came to my mind was, well, what do you expect from a sermon? So I hope you can read the slides okay, because they accidentally turned green when I first started doing it. But I kind of like the kind of analogy of grass and stone, so kind of go with it, yeah? So I kept it in. But this is the question that I asked my daughter and son-in-law, thinking, well, they're not now in this church, so they can answer with openness and honesty, no problem. Well, I guess I kind of asked for it, because here is what they collectively said. And it's on, and I'm clicking forward. Okay, so here's what they said. They said they expected it to be interactive and engaging, to make it real for people like now, what you're going through right now, to have humour, to be visually stimulating. You can see where I'm going with these transitions, can't you? To have reactions from people, because it means you're engaged. To maybe share stories and anecdotes, to have some form of daily application, but most importantly, for it to be memorable in that it should draw you to Jesus. Now, I apologise in advance. The chances are I have missed at least one of those. I'm bound to have done. So, but with that in mind, we come to today's story, which is David and Goliath, as we've already had read to us. But where can I go with this? It's a story that I would think everybody knows really well, young and old. So what can you learn today that's different from what we've learned before? So let's dig in and find out. So first of all, I started off with a timeline, because for me, sometimes you can know a story really well, but you don't kind of know the context of it. You don't necessarily know what's happened before or what's the lead up to it. So it helped me to understand what really had been going on and when in the story, particularly this happens, between the dealings of David and Saul at the time. So let's have a little look. I'm sorry if this is a bit, it always seems huge on my screen, but now it's on this screen. I'm hoping it's big enough for you. So the 1 Samuel timeline in brief. We've got at the beginning of the chapter, first and second chapter, Samuel's born. He's the last judge. In the chapter 3, God calls Samuel to be a judge, calls him to his service. In chapters 4 to 6, the Philistines capture the Ark of God, which is like this big, ornate, holy box, from want of a better word, but it's where God was deemed to be living in. And when the Philistines took it, they would find that their villages would suddenly, people would start getting ill. And so they got to the point where they thought, we can't do this anymore, let's return it. So they gave it back. Chapter 7, Samuel leads Israel to victory. But then in chapter 8, they then ask for a king. He's just led them to victory, but because I think Samuel's sons weren't following the same way he was, they requested a king. So in chapters 9 and 10, Samuel meets Saul and anoints him as king. And through chapters 11 to 14, Saul wins battles. But he's starting to do things his own way. And at chapter 15, the Lord rejects Saul. So at chapter 16, David is anointed, and he starts to serve in Saul's court because the Spirit of the Lord has left Saul. And then we get to Goliath. So that's where we're at. And that leads us to Goliath, our Philistine. This is even smaller. Let me read it for you. So I did a kind of, in Bible Gateway, I just put in the word Philistine. What does that mean? Because that word conjures up a few things in my mind, and I just wanted to see what the history was a little bit more behind them. So in biblical terms, the Philistines generally appear as the villainous enemies of the Israelites. Even today, that phrase, calling someone a Philistine, is a derogatory term. It's kind of used meaning someone who's unreceptive or hostile, or particularly towards the arts, apparently. And you'd use words alongside it like brutish or barbarian. So it's not a particularly good word. So the timeline, roughly, I won't go through them all, is that Abraham had actually, they're mentioned way back in Genesis. Abraham went to move as a foreigner in Philistine country. Philistines didn't like that Isaac was getting on so well and had so many sheep that they got a bit jealous and they stopped up all his wells. As Moses guided the Israelites out of Egypt, the short route would have been through Philistine country. But God knew that that would end up being a war of some kind and might persuade them to go back. So he didn't take them that way, he took them a longer route. But then we see a little bit later, again, these are all Bible quotes, again, the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. So he handed them to the Philistines, who oppressed them for 40 years. Samson was one that started to rescue them from them. But by the time we reach Samuel, in 1 Samuel 7:13, it said that the Philistines were subdued and didn't invade Israel again for some time, even though throughout Samuel's lifetime itself, the Lord's powerful hand was raised against the Philistines. Then weirdly, and I can't explain why, I do not know the reason, in 1 Samuel 13 and 14, Saul's son Jonathan decided to go and attack them. And he defeated, first of all, a Philistine garrison, and then a little bit later, an outpost. Well, I don't know about you, but you wouldn't stir things up with a known enemy, would you? But that's what he's gone and done. And so, from that point, the Israelites fought constantly with the Philistines through Saul's lifetime. And whenever Saul observed a young man who was brave and strong, he drafted them into his army, because he knew that the Philistines were quite a force to contend with. So that's them. Now, just to give you a little bit of context, this is one of the many maps I managed to find online. I hope you can see it okay I don't know if you need the lights off here or anything to see anything a little bit better. But you can see that it's a wide valley, and it's a bit like an amphitheatre. You've got the Philistines on one side, they're on the higher hills, and the Israelites are on the other side, on the lower hills. Huge armies encamped on both areas. And my first thought was, wow, they must have been able to shout pretty loud to be able to be heard from one side to the other. But I would think that, I'm no army tactician, but I would think that the Philistines probably literally had they probably had the fact that they were higher physically, they had more men, and of course they had Goliath. So, before we look at the people involved in this fight, these are that I've got for this morning. And 3 different things, and I liked the alliteration with all the P's, so I went with it. So we have the protagonists, and that basically means the lead characters, okay? So that's David, Goliath, and Saul, and we'll have a look at that in a moment. Then we have the preparation pasture. This is David's previous experience. And then lastly, the perspective on the problem. And I think we can agree that Goliath was a pretty big problem. So, let's look at the protagonists. So we have Goliath. He's this huge beast of a man. The Bible writes he was 6 cubits and a span tall. It said it slightly different in the version that Michelle read. But a cubit is this long, and a span is this wide. So that roughly equates to 9'9". That sounds big, yes? I don't know if you can imagine that. So for me, I need a visual, because I just need a visual. So we've got our very own Goliath from our holiday club. So Andy, would you mind coming forward? Because here we go. So if you could please climb up roughly so your head is in line with the Jesus, that would be fab. Okay, please hold on. I don't want any health and safety problems. Can you imagine? First time Deborah gets up to speak and there's an accident. Don't even think about it. So, this is how tall he was, okay? So, right. And just grip on tight for a little bit longer. Thank you. So Goliath had been strutting around, he's been parading. Strutting is the word that my Bible said. I love that word. It sounds as though he's really cocky and I know it all and no one can do anything for me. And he'd been doing that twice a day for 40 days, shouting against God, taunting the Israelites to come and fight, and he's a champion. This was a high-stakes fight. This was a winner-takes-all scenario. Because as Goliath was challenging the Israelites to come up with just one person willing to take him on. Now this was someone who's not only tall, so first of all, let's have a look. He is a brave man. We know he's a seasoned warrior. His stature is massive, okay? And we know that he's taunting against God every day. So he is most definitely, please work, not a man of God. But he's not only tall, but he didn't appear to have any vulnerabilities. He was armoured and weaponed up to the eyeballs. He had a solid iron spear, he had a big helmet, he had a club, he had bronze leggings, he had boots, and a very nasty attitude. Plus he had a bronze coat of mail weighing, my version of the Bible said 125 pounds. Andy, please come down gently, carefully. Thank you. Now, but please don't go. George, could I please borrow you as well? Would that be okay? Can you come down just for a moment? Because, please don't ask or judge me and ask me the reasons why, but I have my own coat of armour. Okay, so, could please the two of you, so that's a small version. If anyone's got children here and they want to want them to try it on, they're more than welcome to try that. But if the two of you can hold it out between you, this is heavy, okay? You can, okay? No, please don't put it on. No. You want to put it on. Okay? If you want to put it on, the only way to get it off again afterwards is kind of lean forward and just let it fall. Oh my word, I did not expect anyone to try it on. So, okay. All right? Feels heavy. George is ready to jog. Excellent. Okay, well, okay. Right, Andy, you might need to help him off. You need to kind of lean forward and let it fall out. Okay? Please don't wear it for any longer than you need to. But this armour here, just that's it, lean forward and it'll drop off. Dip down a bit further. Whoops! Keep your shirt. Whoa, well done. Okay, thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much for your help. That is 37 pounds. So what Goliath had on was 3 times that weight. Okay? So this is the man who's shouting at the Israelites every day. How on earth did they put up with it for 40 days? Why had it gone on so long? I don't know. Did they think maybe someone was finally going to step forward and fight? Did they think Goliath would get a sore throat and decide to go home and leave? I do find it strange that 2 armies should just try and have a standoff for over a month. Perhaps there's significance in the number 40 because that's a number that appears quite a lot in key events over in the Bible. I don't know the answer to that one. But any which way, that is a very long time to put up with someone bad-mouthing you at great volume in front of your army. So, Saul, where is he in all this? He's the king. And we already know he's a brave man. Okay. And we know that he's a seasoned warrior. And it tells us in the Bible, in at least 2 places, that he is at least a head taller than other people around him. So he was by far the biggest man in the kingdom. He was also from the tribe of Benjamin, which, although small, was apparently renowned for the warriors it produced. And yet in verse 11 of chapter 17, it says that on hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. And later in verse 24, it says that whenever the Israelites saw this man, they all fled from him in great fear. This is supposed to be the mighty nation of God. Here's Goliath defying God on God's own turf, and they're paralyzed with fear. Saul could have tried to kill Goliath himself with his track record, but I wonder if maybe the lead up to this story gives us more of a clue. Do you remember when we looked back on the timeline, the previous chapter, 1 Samuel 16 says this, and it's across two separate stories, but they are consecutive verses. And it says, "So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him." So is he a man of God? It would seem that lack of faith was Saul's problem. He trusted in himself and found maybe, at least as far as Goliath was concerned, that he was a coward. And lastly, we have David. Is he a brave man? Yes. He's fought bears and lions, hasn't he, to protect his flock? Brave man, yes. Seasoned warrior? No. He's likely only a teenager. They say Goliath thought he was only a boy. His stature. Well, when Samuel was told by God to visit David's family and anoint one of Jesse's sons, he first saw the eldest son, Eliab. But God said, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things that man looks at." So we could infer from this that David was probably not overly tall, at least not in respect to his brother. So, probably shorter. Definitely shorter than the other guys. But this last column, this is the one that makes the difference, isn't it? Was David a man of God? Absolutely yes. During David's youth as a shepherd, he developed many skills. He's learned music, he's learned how to write, we've read many of the Psalms. He's used a sling, he's learned how to use it, he's how to fight and protect his sheep, he's practiced that, and how to love the Lord and obey him. So David's motivation in the battle was the glory of God and the protection of his name. Verse 46 said, "So that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel." So he went into the battle full of faith and confident that God would give him victory. But given those bare statistics, you'd probably bet on the giant winning, wouldn't you? Okay. Anyone recognize this? Karate Kid, yeah. So this is a young boy who had been beaten up and he wanted to be able to learn self-defense. He was the underdog, very much the underdog. What he's doing there is practicing, I think was it called the crane or something like that. It was a very particular move against which there's no defense. If he perfected it, there's no defense. And of course, the film being as it is, we're all rooting for him. You all want the underdog to win. He practiced it for hours and hours. For those of you who remember, it was like wax on, wax off. And he practiced and practiced, and he became the champion. Which leads me to our next bit, which is preparation in the pasture. So David had had plenty of opportunity over his time of being a shepherd. He's had plenty of opportunity to hone his skill with a sling. This wasn't the first time he'd faced difficulties or danger. He'd fought lions and bears to defend those sheep. And he'd proved and tested that skill many times over with lots of hard work and many hours of practice. And some skills and abilities need that, don't they? I'm not going to, for example, expect to be an expert at wood turning by watching Roger once or being able to. I'm guessing you made those Jenga blocks we used the other week? Oh, but I know that I've seen some lovely work that you've done anyway, Roger. So, but I'm not going to just watch him and then try it for myself and expect I'll probably lose a finger or three. So that's hours and hours of practice, just as playing the piano is hours and hours of practice that's got me to the point where I'm at now. And I've still got plenty to learn. But I remember reading somewhere that there are lessons that you learn in the pasture that no school, no sermon or book will ever teach you. And remember that David had already been anointed at this point. He's already been anointed to be king of Israel. And yet, after this anointing, he went back to the pasture, not to the throne. He went back to watch his sheep, not to go and eat a banquet in a court palace court even. He went back to protecting his flock until it was God's timing for him to become king. And as I was preparing this talk, preparing what I should say, and praying about it, this thought just suddenly popped into my head. Building this church is our time in the pasture. Something that came out of our house group over the last couple of weeks is that the encouragement that Mark spoke about last week is something we do really well here. And we need to encourage so we know what our gifts are, so we can step out in confidence. And also by encouraging others, being together, it gives you a bond. And it builds us up because we're all part of the body. We're all part of this church. And then we can use our togetherness to build our church to reach people out in the community. So this is our time to come together, to prepare ourselves for the giants ahead, to build each other up, and also to build up those skills, to use what we have and to go out, like David did, full of faith, full of confidence in the God we serve. Amen? Because we all have giants in our lives, and they're not necessarily huge in stature or even scary or threatening. Perhaps you know someone with a very strong personality, with a biting tongue, a powerful presence, someone that makes you feel small in their presence. Someone maybe in the workplace, either now or in the past, in whose company you feel tongue-tied and your brain goes to mush and you suddenly feel completely incompetent and really nervous. Now, God has gifted me to be good at what I do at my job. And yet, if the head teacher suddenly comes in and says, Deborah, can you give me the attendance statistics for last week for just the special needs children who were on free school meals and just for Wednesday? I will go blah, 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 for a moment because she's there. I know how to do it. It's just her presence around me, and that can happen. So facing giants in life can be tough, but it's inevitable, isn't it? And we need to be realistic. We live in a fallen world, and no one's immune to crisis. No one's immune to heartache or struggle. It's going to come to all of us. But 1 Peter 4:12 says this, Dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. Don't be surprised. John 16:33 says this, Jesus says, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Yes? So we can prepare for trouble. And the lesson from David is that we'll have to expect to endure hardship now and then, just as he had the wild animals to deal with. It did give him the experience to then go and help him when dealing with a giant. So, twisting an old saying, take care of your lions and bears, and the giants will take care of themselves. So with all that armour on, if you think about it, David actually went for the one vulnerable spot that Goliath had. His face. He was covered everywhere else. Nothing else would have penetrated. But he knew exactly where to go. He confronted and he conquered the giant. So if we have a giant that's maybe a person in our life, confront them. Not with a sling, please. Confront them with love, confront them with prayer. Yes? If it's a problem, meet it head on. Remember God's past victories and confidently give it to him and do what you can. Sure, David gained out of it. He got hero status. He got a wife. He got plenty of money. He even got the family being exempt from taxes for the rest of their lives. That must have been pretty awesome. But the greatest reward, I'm sure, would have been the personal satisfaction of knowing that right and good had prevailed and God's name had been honoured. So, we move on to our last, not quite last slide. David came onto the scene 40 days in and immediately looked at it differently to seasoned warriors of Israel that were there. This man isn't a giant. That's what everyone else could see. What he saw was someone defying God. He couldn't believe it. He was indignant. How dare they? And why aren't the soldiers furious about this as well? Why are they running away? Why aren't they dealing with this? He's going from place to place in search of his brothers, trying to find somebody who's brave enough to take on Goliath, and there's nobody. Every time Goliath steps forward, they run back. Not David. How did he fight? Not with borrowed armour. When you get to the big challenges in life, you can't afford to change your weapons then. And the man after God's own heart, who was David, was never going to fight in the borrowed armour of an unbelieving, or at best, a half-hearted king. So, we have in 2 Corinthians 10, for though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. So, seek Christian advice. Search the Bible. Do as David did. Search for God's solution and reject the human ones, as there's bound to be things you'll need to turn your back on. There'll be people who'll try and make you go the wrong way. Don't get pulled in the wrong direction. Remember the past victories and give God credit for them. We tend to forget them because we're so good at remembering the prayers that were answered in a different way than we wanted them to be answered. And we forget the blessings that God has given us. I came across a quote by Spurgeon, those of you who like philosopher, historians, Bible scholars. And he said, "It has been well said that we write our benefits in dust and our injuries in marble. And it's equally true that we generally inscribe our afflictions upon brass, while the records of the deliverances of God are written in water." But David remembered and drew courage from what God had done for him. And he gave credit to God. He wrote them down in the Psalms. So write down those answered prayers Look back on the many blessings. Think back even to last week and the number of answered prayers. My husband being here this morning is one of them. Verbalize confidence in God before the battle, just like David did. You might not be able to control your negative thoughts or your doubts, but you can control your speech. So don't be saying, oh, I can't do that. It's too much to handle, I might as well give in. Declare the outcome. God will sustain you. 1 Corinthians 10 tells us, every test you have experienced is the kind that normally comes to people. But God keeps his promise, and he will not allow you to be tested beyond the power to remain firm. At the time you are put to the test, he will give you the strength to endure it, and so provide you with a way out. God will sustain you. Tricky parents at school, I get them all the time. Last week was particularly hard. They always seem to come in my direction, mainly because my colleagues say, oh, Deborah, you deal with this one. And they may be outside, they may be ranting and raving about something, or they may be ranting and raving down the phone. But they regularly seem to come to me. I overheard my colleagues saying the other day, they were telling somebody else, they said, oh, you listen, because as I took over a phone call from a parent who was particularly upset about something, and my colleagues were saying to a teacher, they said, oh, you go and listen. They were swearing at us down the phone, but they'll be laughing with Deborah in a minute. But these are my mini Goliaths every single day almost. And I can only deal with them because I've practiced many times. I've had many times to deal with them. And I've had to do it over and over again. But I try and deal with it by, my desire is to make things better. Go into it with an understanding smile. Try to see a different perspective on the problem than maybe my colleagues had. So God used David's skill of using a sling along with his love for the Lord, to defeat Goliath. He used what he had. He may have only gone with a sling and 5 stones, but that wasn't all he used, was it? He later picked up Goliath's sword, and he used it to chop his head off, to finish the job off completely. So we too can pick things up along the way. And just as we were singing, in God I look to you, I won't be overwhelmed. Give me wisdom, you know just what to do. That's what we do. We don't need to feel overwhelmed. We just need to trust that we can take on the challenge together in Christ. So David knew that it's not the size of our weapons, but the size of our faith in God that matters. The real giant that day wasn't the one big in stature. It was the one whose faith was completely in God. So where does that leave us? What's the title for this series? Use what you have. So I'm going to finish by looking at each of these words, putting the emphasis in a different place. Use what you have. So, now I'm having to squint. So, don't let a skill lay dormant. Let it be used to build up the church and beyond while we're in the pasture here together. Use what you have. Use what you have. Do you know what your skill is? If you're not sure, ask someone else, because I can guarantee you that someone else will spot and will know what your skill is, even if you haven't seen it in yourself. Use what you have. Use what you have. Don't try and copy somebody else. Don't do the borrowed armor. Don't take on something else. you are unique, and your skill style is unique too. And that's fine. And lastly, use what you have. What you have is God-given, so share it. And don't be afraid. We're family here and we love each other, and we're here to encourage each other to use what we have. Amen? Amen. Thank you.